She escaped her husband's cruelty, and found love again. Under the pale morning light, the road stretched endlessly before her, cracked asphalt cutting through miles of open land, where silence was heavier than sound. Emily Carson drove without looking back, her hands trembling on the steering wheel of a rusted blue pickup that had seen better years. The wind whipped through the open window, tangling her hair and drying the tears that refused to stop. Behind her, a house that once felt like safety now stood as nothing but a cage of memories, broken glass, bruised dreams, and promises that turned to pain. She didn't take much. Just a duffel bag with a few clothes, her mother's old photo, and a folded letter she couldn't bring herself to read. The rest she left behind, the furniture, the ring, and the man who'd taken too much from her soul to ever deserve her forgiveness. The highway wound through the rolling fields of Wyoming, and though her heart still ached, she felt something new begin to stir. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something gentler, freedom. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel like it belonged to someone else. It belonged to her. By the time she reached the small town of Red Willow, the sun had climbed high, painting the sky in that dusty shade of gold the West always wore. A sign at the edge of town read, "Population 2418, where the heart finds its home." She let out a small, bitter laugh. Home. The word sounded strange now, like it belonged to someone else's story. Emily parked near a diner that stood at the corner of Main Street, an old building with faded paint and a flickering sign that read Maggie's Place. She hadn't eaten since the night before, and hunger mixed with exhaustion made her feel lightheaded. She stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The scent of coffee and fresh biscuits filled the air, wrapping around her like comfort she didn't know she missed. A few locals sat scattered around, their voices low, the morning slow and peaceful. Behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with silver hair smiled kindly. "You look like you've been on the road a while, sweetheart," she said, pouring a cup of coffee before Emily even asked. Emily nodded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Just passing through." The woman's smile held something understanding. "Aren't we all, at one time or another?" She slid the coffee across the counter. "Name's Maggie. If you're looking for a place to rest your head, the Miller Ranch down the road is always hiring. Old Jack Miller's too kind for his own good." Emily hesitated. A ranch. Work. It sounded far from what she was used to, but maybe that was exactly what she needed, something far from everything she'd known. "Thank you," she said softly, taking a sip. The warmth hit her chest like hope rediscovering its place. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and soil. Emily stayed there for an hour, finishing her meal, listening to the low hum of the diner, the clinking of cups, and the sound of a town that seemed untouched by the chaos of the world she'd left behind. By the time she walked out, the sun was starting to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the main street. She climbed into her truck, the road to the Miller Ranch stretching out like a promise she wasn't sure she deserved. When she reached the gate, a weathered sign greeted her, "Miller Ranch, EST 1943. Beyond it stretched acres of open pasture, horses grazing in the distance, and the soft hum of life that came with hard work and honest sweat. As she drove up the dirt path, her eyes caught sight of a man near the barn, tall, broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low against the setting sun. He was stacking hay bales, his movements slow, steady, and sure. There was something about him, not just his strength, but the stillness around him, that made her pause. She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment her story began again. When she parked, he turned, brushing the dust from his gloves. His eyes met hers briefly, a deep, quiet brown that carried more weight than words. He gave a small nod, polite but distant, and went back to work. Emily stepped out, unsure if she should call out or just leave. Before she could decide, an older man came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His weathered face broke into a grin. "Afternoon. You must be looking for work. Maggie sent you, didn't she?" Emily nodded. Yes, sir. I'm Emily. I can do just about anything. Good. We can use the help. He glanced toward the younger man. That's Luke. My nephew. He doesn't talk much, but he gets things done. Luke lifted his head again, meeting her gaze once more, just for a heartbeat. This time, she didn't look away. As the evening air grew cooler, Jack showed her to a small cabin near the edge of the property. It was simple, a bed, a table, a window overlooking the pasture, but it was more than enough. When she closed the door behind her that night, she leaned against it, breathing in the scent of wood and clean air. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Outside, crickets sang, the stars stretched endlessly above, and somewhere in the distance, Luke's boots crunched against the gravel as he finished his chores. Emily lay down on the bed, the sound of the night wrapping around her like a lullaby. The road behind her was gone, and the one ahead was still uncertain, but here, under the quiet Wyoming sky, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, peace wasn't as far away as it once seemed. The morning broke soft and golden, with sunlight spilling gently over the Miller Ranch like a quiet blessing. Dew clung to the grass, glinting in the early light, and somewhere beyond the fence line, the faint neigh of a horse rose against the stillness. Emily woke to that sound, calm, steady, alive. For a moment, she simply lay there, listening, as though the ranch itself was whispering that she was safe now. She rose slowly, her body still sore from the long drive and the weight of the past she'd carried. The cabin felt cool and clean, the wooden floor creaking softly under her bare feet. She looked out the window. Luke was already at work, his figure moving through the mist like he belonged to the land itself. He carried himself with a quiet strength that didn't need to be spoken. It wasn't pride, nor arrogance, just peace. The kind that comes from surviving your own storms. By the time she made her way to the barn, the scent of hay and leather filled the air. Jack was there, fixing a fence post, while Luke brushed down one of the horses, a chestnut mare with a gentle look in her eyes. Emily hesitated at the door, unsure where she fit into this rhythm that already seemed so practiced. Jack looked up with a grin. "Morning, Emily. Coffee's on the porch if you need a cup. Luke'll show you what needs doing once you're ready." Luke gave a small nod, silent as ever. He handed her a pair of gloves and motioned toward the stables. "She's gentle," he said simply, referring to the horse. His voice was deep but kind, carrying that quiet steadiness that made even the hardest words sound soft. Emily nodded, her hand brushing the horse's mane. The animal blinked calmly, leaning into her touch. It felt strange, being trusted so easily, even by a creature. Back where she came from, trust was something she had to earn and defend. Here, it seemed to just exist. The day moved slowly. She learned how to feed the horses, clean stalls, and carry water buckets without spilling half of it down her boots. She laughed once when she tripped over a loose board, and even though Luke didn't say a word, she caught the faintest curve of a smile tugging at his lips before he looked away. By noon, the sun was high and merciless, and Jack called them over to the porch for lunch. "You're doing fine, Emily," he said, passing her a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "Don't mind Luke's silence, he just ain't much for talking since." He paused, then shook his head lightly. "Well, you'll figure him out." Luke shot him a look, not angry, just quiet. Emily didn't pry. She understood the language of silence better than anyone. After lunch, while Jack headed into town, Emily found herself alone by the corral, watching Luke work with the horses. He moved with purpose, calm but firm, guiding them with a patience that came from understanding rather than control. It fascinated her. At one point, a younger horse reared unexpectedly, startled by the crack of distant thunder. Emily flinched, instinctively stepping back. But Luke stood his ground, speaking softly until the horse settled. His hands were strong, sure, and gentle, a combination that stirred something deep inside her. When he noticed her watching, he walked over, removing his gloves. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded. I don't like storms much. Most folks don't, he said, his tone understanding, not prying. But they pass. They always do. That line stayed with her, not just because of the way he said it, but because it felt like it meant more. As the afternoon drifted into evening, rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, until the sound filled the ranch with a rhythm all its own. They worked to move the horses inside before the worst of it hit, both soaked by the time they closed the barn doors. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of hay and rain. Emily brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, laughing quietly at her own clumsiness. Luke stood nearby, watching her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes, not pity, not amusement, but recognition. "You did good today," he said, his voice barely above the sound of rain on the roof. She looked at him, surprised. "I didn't think I was." "You're learning," he replied. "Takes time." "Everything does." For a few seconds, they stood in that quiet space, the storm raging outside, but peace hanging between them. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was gentle, like two broken pieces of something slowly realizing they might fit together. Later, when the rain eased, Emily walked back to her cabin. Her boots squelched through the wet dirt, her clothes heavy with water, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. She glanced once over her shoulder. Luke was still at the barn, closing the doors, his figure framed by the fading light. That night, she couldn't sleep right away. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of earth and new beginnings. She thought of Luke, of the way he moved, the way he spoke, the quiet strength he carried. She wasn't ready to feel anything yet, but something in her heart shifted all the same. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. And in that fragile peace, under the hush of the western sky, Emily began to heal, not from what she'd lost, but from the belief that she'd never be whole again. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that almost felt like peace. Morning light spilling through the cabin window. The scent of coffee drifting from the porch. The sound of horses snorting softly in the fields. For Emily, it became something sacred, this quiet, simple life where the world didn't demand anything from her except honesty. Each day, she worked beside Luke, mending fences, cleaning stalls, or hauling feed. He never said much, but his silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, safe. Sometimes she'd catch him watching her out of the corner of his eye, as though making sure she was really all right without asking outright. Jack noticed, too. "You've got a good hand with the horses," he told her one afternoon. "They trust you." "That's rare." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe they know what it's like to be scared." Jack gave her a thoughtful look but didn't press further. He was an old soul, wise enough to know when not to ask questions. By the third week, Emily began to laugh more easily. She started humming when she worked, her voice soft but clear. It surprised her at first, that sound. It had been years since she'd heard herself sing anything. The simple tune carried across the fields one warm afternoon as she scrubbed down the troughs. Luke passed by, leading a horse, and she caught the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips again. "You're gettin' the hang of it," he said. "Of what?" "Living here." She looked around at the open land, the steady peace of the ranch. "I didn't think I'd ever get used to it," she admitted quietly. "But it feels safe." Luke paused, setting down the bridle. "You deserve safe." The words were soft, but they sank deep, deeper than he probably meant them to. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, thunder rolled far in the distance. The summer storms were returning. That evening, while the wind picked up, Emily stayed behind in the barn to finish feeding. The rain came suddenly, heavy and cold, pounding against the tin roof. She startled at first, storm still made her uneasy, but before the fear could rise, Luke appeared at the door. "Storm's movin' fast," he said, stepping inside. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I just don't like the sound." It brings things back. Luke leaned against one of the wooden beams, arms crossed, his voice steady. Used to be the same for me. Lost my brother in one of these storms. Flash flood took him off the road near Sheridan. Emily's heart tightened. I'm sorry. He shrugged, looking away toward the rain. It was a long time ago. You just, learn to live around it. The way he said it, not get over it, but live around it, struck something in her. Because that's what she'd been doing too, all this time. Living around the pain. Around the fear. Around the memory of what love was supposed to be but never was. The silence stretched, not awkward, just heavy with the truth between them. Emily finally spoke. He wasn't always cruel, you know. My husband. Not at first. He was charming. Kind, even. Then things changed. She stared at the ground, her voice soft. He made me believe it was my fault, every bruise, every word, every time I thought of leaving. Luke said nothing, but his eyes, quiet, dark, and steady, told her she didn't need to explain. You were brave to leave, he said finally. She let out a shaky breath. I don't feel brave. Most brave folks don't. The wind howled outside, rattling the barn doors, but inside there was a calm, a fragile understanding between two souls who'd both lost something and learned to build again. When the storm finally passed, the air was cool and clean, smelling of rain and earth. Luke offered to walk her back to her cabin. The path was slick with mud, the moonlight breaking through clouds in soft silver beams. Halfway there, she slipped, her boot sliding on the wet ground, but Luke caught her before she fell. For a heartbeat, they stood close, the warmth of his hand steadying her, his breath mixing with hers in the night air. She pulled away gently, a nervous laugh escaping her. Guess I'm still learning. He smiled, small but real. You're doing fine. Back at her cabin, she hesitated at the door. She wanted to thank him, for the walk, for the quiet, for not asking too much, but the words tangled in her throat. He seemed to understand anyway. Get some rest, he said, tipping his hat before walking away. Emily watched him go, the faint light from the barn outlining his figure as he disappeared into the darkness. Something about that moment felt different, not the kind of difference you see, but the kind you feel. The next morning, the sky was clear again, the storm nothing but a memory. But when Emily went to feed the horses, she noticed something strange, a car parked near the gate. It wasn't one of the ranch trucks. Her chest tightened. She couldn't see the driver clearly from where she stood, but something about the shape of that dark SUV made her stomach twist. Jack walked out of the barn, frowning. Can I help you? He called out toward the car. The driver didn't respond right away. Then, as the door opened, Emily's breath caught in her throat. Even from that distance, she recognized the way he stood, tall, rigid, and cold as a memory she thought she'd left behind. Her husband. The world seemed to tilt for a moment, the air draining from her lungs. Luke stepped beside her instinctively, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching, not yet. Emily? Jack asked, confused. She could barely whisper. He found me. The car door slammed, and the man started walking toward them, his expression unreadable beneath the glare of the morning sun. Luke's jaw tightened, eyes fixed on him like a hawk watching a storm roll in. And just like that, the peace she had found, the fragile calm of red willow, the healing she'd begun, trembled on the edge of breaking. The morning broke with the smell of rain on the wind. The horizon was painted in shades of silver and gray, and the vast field stretched out beneath the heavy clouds like a painting waiting to be ruined by a storm. Jake was already outside before dawn, fixing the fence that had been knocked down by last night's wind. His hands were steady, but his mind wasn't. Ever since that night at the river, the night he'd almost told Emily what she meant to him, he couldn't think straight. Emily watched him from the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. There was peace in her eyes, but also something else, a quiet ache she couldn't shake. For weeks now, the ranch had started to feel like home. The rhythm of life there, feeding the horses, mending fences, sunsets that stretched forever, had begun to heal her. But with healing came feeling. And with feeling came fear. Jake looked up from the field, sensing her gaze even from a distance. Their eyes met across the pasture, and in that silent exchange, 1,000 things were said that words could never carry. By noon, the storm had arrived. Rain poured down in wild sheets, drenching everything. Emily ran out to help Jake bring in the horses before the thunder hit. The wind howled around them, whipping her hair across her face. She laughed through it, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years, as Jake grabbed her hand and pulled her under the stable roof. "You're soaked," he said, brushing the rain from her cheeks. "So are you," she replied softly. The moment lingered, heavy, charged, beautiful. Jake took a step closer, his voice low and uncertain. "Emily. I don't know what brought you here, or what you're still running from, but I want you to know, you don't have to be afraid anymore." She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "Jake. I was broken when I came here. I didn't think I'd ever trust again. But you," she paused, her voice trembling, "you make me feel safe. Like I can breathe again." Lightning split the sky behind them, and in that sudden flash, Jake kissed her. It wasn't rushed, or wild, it was gentle, like something long overdue. The storm raged around them, but for a few eternal seconds, there was only warmth and stillness. When the rain slowed, they stood side by side at the stable doors, watching the clouds drift apart. The scent of wet earth filled the air, and the faintest hint of sunlight broke through. That evening, as the sky blushed gold, Jake sat on the porch, tuning his old guitar. Emily came out with 2 cups of tea, her hair still damp. She handed him a cup and sat beside him, the silence between them peaceful now, not heavy. "You ever think about leaving?" Jake asked after a long while. Emily smiled faintly. "I used to. But not anymore. Not since this place started feeling like home." Jake looked out across the ranch, the land he'd spent his whole life working, and then back at her. "Then I reckon you're where you're meant to be." They watched as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows over the grass. The wind was calm now. The world, quiet. For the first time in a long time, both of them felt something simple and rare, peace. But deep down, they both knew peace never lasted long in the West. Tomorrow would bring something, maybe news from her past, maybe a test of their newfound bond. But for tonight, the world could wait. Tonight, there was only the sound of crickets, the warmth of shared silence, and the quiet truth that love, real love, had finally found them beneath the open sky. The days after the storm were quiet, almost too quiet. The air was soft, the hills a deep shade of green, and the river sparkled as though the rain had washed away all the pain that had lingered there. For Emily, it felt like a new beginning. She spent her mornings feeding the horses, her afternoons sketching in a worn notebook, and her evenings sitting beside Jake as the sun melted into the horizon. It was a rhythm she never thought she'd find again, one made of peace instead of fear. But peace in the West was a fragile thing. One afternoon, a truck pulled up the long dirt road leading to the ranch. Jake was in the barn, repairing a saddle, when he heard the tires crunch over gravel. His gut twisted before he even saw who it was. Emily was hanging laundry by the fence when she turned and froze. The man stepping out of the truck was someone she'd hoped to never see again, her ex-husband, David. He looked different, not softer, not changed, but worn down. His eyes darted from the house to Emily, and a bitter smirk touched his face. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, his voice dripping with mock calm. Emily's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. "I'm not hiding," she said quietly. "I left you. For good." Jake stepped out of the barn, his presence like a wall of calm strength. "You should leave, mister," he said evenly, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Ain't nothin' here for you." David's gaze hardened. "Stay out of this, cowboy. This is between me and my wife." "She ain't your wife anymore," Jake said. His tone didn't rise, but there was steel in it, the kind that made men think twice. David's jaw tightened. "You think you can steal her away? You think you know her better than I do?" Jake took a step closer, the wind picking up dust around their boots. "I don't have to know her past to see she deserves better than what she's had." The tension snapped like a whip. David lunged, shoving Jake, but Jake didn't fight back, not right away. He held his ground, eyes locked on the man who had once broken Emily piece by piece. When David swung, Jake caught his arm mid-air and pushed him back, firm, controlled, final. "Go," Jake said, his voice low. "Before you lose more than your pride." For a moment, David stood there breathing hard, his anger collapsing into something smaller, fear, shame, regret. Then he spat into the dirt, turned, and climbed back into his truck. The engine roared to life, and he drove away, the dust cloud swallowing him whole. Emily's knees weakened, and she sank against the fence post. Jake rushed to her side, holding her gently as she buried her face against his chest. "He's gone," Jake whispered. "You're safe now. He's gone for good." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of fear this time, but release. It was over. Truly over. The weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. That night, the ranch was quieter than ever. The stars hung bright over the plains, and the moonlight bathed everything in silver. Emily sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. Jake joined her, handing her a mug of hot cocoa. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to. I didn't do nothin' special. Just didn't let the past take you back." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, her heart didn't ache. It felt steady. Whole. "You gave me back something I thought I lost," she said. "Peace." Jake leaned back in his chair, eyes on the stars. "Peace is hard to come by out here. But if you find it, you hold on tight." The silence that followed was warm. The night hummed with crickets and soft wind. Emily rested her head against his shoulder, and for once, the world didn't feel like something to escape. Months passed, and life on the ranch found its rhythm again. Emily planted a small garden near the house, the soil rich and dark. Jake built her a new fence, stronger than the last one, not because he feared storms, but because it felt like building something that would last. Sometimes they'd sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun fade and the world settle. And though no grand words were spoken, the truth was there in every shared glance, every quiet laugh, every sunrise that found them still together. In a land that had seen too much pain, they had built something soft, something sacred, not perfect, but real. And in the heart of the modern West, where dust still rose and storms still rolled across the plains, love, fragile, stubborn, and endlessly healing, found a home again.